At a party, my girlfriend laughed when asked if she'd marry me, said I was just fine for now. 3 days later, she's begging me to propose while I'm planning my wedding to her younger sister. I never thought I'd be the guy living out someone's worst nightmare, but here we are. I was grabbing another beer from Kyle's kitchen when I heard Monica's voice floating from the living room, that particular tone she used when she was holding court with her sorority sisters from USC. I'd been dating Monica for 2 years, and this housewarming party in our San Diego neighborhood was supposed to be a celebration. Kyle had finally bought his first house after building his landscaping business from nothing, complete with a mortgage he'd qualified for on his own credit, and I was genuinely proud of my best friend's success. We'd both aged out of foster care together at 18 with nothing but a couple $100 and whatever fit in a garbage bag, so watching him thrive felt like validation that our rough starts didn't define our endings. I was planning to surprise Monica with a promise ring next week for our anniversary, something simple but meaningful that showed I was serious about our future together. The velvet box was sitting in my truck's glove compartment, and I'd been rehearsing what I'd say when I gave it to her, practicing the words that would tell her she was worth building a life around. "So would you actually marry Jared?" I heard Ashley ask, and my hand froze on the refrigerator handle, beer bottle halfway to my lips. "Oh my God, no way," Monica laughed, that sharp, dismissive sound she made when she thought something was particularly ridiculous. "I mean, he's sweet and all, but he's just fine for now. Until I find someone with real money and connections, you know?" My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step going downstairs, that familiar free-fall sensation I remembered from childhood. I stood there listening as she continued, her voice carrying clearly through Kyle's open-concept living space. "He's a firefighter instructor, not even a real captain or anything important. Lives in that tiny beach cottage with his beat-up old truck. I'm not trying to be mean, but seriously, I can't introduce someone like that at the industry events I need to attend for my career. He's like temporary entertainment until something better comes along." The women laughed appreciatively, and I heard glasses clinking as they moved on to discussing someone's vacation photos from Cabo. I felt 12 years old again, standing in another foster family's hallway while they debated whether keeping me was worth the emotional and financial hassle. The Hendersons had eventually decided it wasn't, just like the Kowalskis before them and the Patels before that. Each family had their reasons why I didn't quite fit their picture of what they wanted their lives to look like. I'd learned to recognize that tone, the casual dismissal that meant I was being evaluated and found lacking in ways that mattered to them. I quietly set my unopened beer on Kyle's granite counter and walked out his back door, fishing my keys from my pocket while trying to keep my breathing steady. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. Maybe I'd been expecting this conversation eventually, somewhere deep down where I kept all my abandonment fears carefully locked away like evidence of my fundamental inadequacy. The drive to the beach where I volunteered took 15 minutes through the winding streets of Pacific Beach, and I spent them trying to process what I just heard echoing in my head. Monica knew about my history in foster care, knew how every placement had ended with well-meaning people deciding I wasn't quite what they'd hoped for when they signed up. She'd held me through panic attacks when those memories surfaced during anniversaries of my parents' death, promised me that not everyone would leave, that she saw something in me worth staying for. Apparently, she'd been lying the entire time, or at least keeping her real opinions to herself while she figured out her exit strategy. I parked at the beach access where I taught water safety to kids from the group homes, kids who reminded me of myself at that age, desperate to prove they deserved love and stability, convinced that if they just tried hard enough, someone might actually want to keep them around. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent 2 years trying to prove to Monica that I was worth keeping, never realizing she'd already decided I wasn't and was just biding her time until something better walked into her life. I'd built my life deliberately small but meaningful after aging out of the system at 18 with nothing but a duffel bag and determination not to become another statistic that social workers would shake their heads about at conferences. The fire department hired me as a training coordinator 3 years ago, and while I wasn't pulling down 6 figures like the tech bros Monica networked with, I made decent money teaching new recruits ocean rescue techniques and running weekend surf lessons for at-risk youth through a non-profit partnership with local group homes. My beach cottage was a 15-minute walk from the station, small but mine, with a view of the Pacific that made every mortgage payment feel worthwhile and a tiny deck where I could watch the sunset while grading incident reports. The restored 1987 Ford pickup in my driveway had taken me 2 years to rebuild from the frame up, hunting for parts at salvage yards and learning engine repair from YouTube videos, and I was prouder of that truck than most people were of their luxury cars because it represented everything I'd accomplished on my own. Monica worked for Elegant Affairs, an upscale event planning company that handled million-dollar weddings and corporate galas for San Diego's entertainment and tech elite, coordinating events where individual floral arrangements cost more than most people's monthly rent. She drove a leased white Mercedes that cost more per month than my mortgage, lived in a luxury apartment complex in La Jolla with amenities I couldn't pronounce like a concierge and valet parking, and spent her weekends networking at yacht clubs and country clubs throughout Southern California where membership fees started at $20,000 annually. We'd met 18 months ago when my crew responded to a kitchen fire at the Grand Del Mar, one of her high-end wedding venues where she was coordinating a 3-day celebration that probably cost more than I made in a year, complete with imported flowers and a celebrity chef flown in from New York. While my team ventilated smoke from the industrial kitchen and checked for structural damage, she'd handled the crisis with impressive calm, rescheduling vendor deliveries and relocating dinner service to the resort's backup ballroom without losing her composure or making the bride feel like her perfect day was ruined. "You guys are lifesavers," she'd said afterward, and something about the way she looked at me made me think she meant it as more than professional gratitude. When I asked if she wanted to grab coffee sometime, she'd surprised me by saying yes immediately, like she'd been hoping I'd ask. Our first date was at a casual beachside cafe where she seemed genuinely charmed by my stories of helping troubled teenagers find purpose through ocean rescue training, laughing at my awkward attempts at surf instruction humor and asking thoughtful questions about working with kids who'd been written off by everyone else in their lives. She told me about growing up in Malibu with parents who measured success by net worth and social connections, how she'd chosen event planning because she loved creating perfect moments for people, even if those people had more money than sense and spent fortunes on parties that lasted a few hours. "You do something that actually matters," she'd said that first night, watching surfers catch the last waves before sunset. "These kids you work with, they're lucky to have someone who gives a damn about them as human beings." For months, it felt real and sustainable. She started keeping designer clothes at my cottage, joined me for weekend beach cleanups with the volunteer groups, even helped me teach basic water safety to a group of foster kids during a summer program, getting in the water despite worrying about what salt water would do to her expensive highlights. She'd take photos of us working together and post them with captions about finding someone who shared her values and made her want to be a better person, making it seem like my modest lifestyle was exactly what she'd been looking for all along. Kyle had been encouraging me to trust that not everyone would abandon me like my past experiences suggested, pointing out how Monica seemed different from the women who usually dismissed guys like us once they learned about our backgrounds. "She's not running when she sees where you live or what you drive," he'd remind me when my old fears surfaced during quiet moments. "She's choosing to be here every day, man. That has to mean something real." I'd started believing him, started thinking maybe I'd found someone who valued substance over status, someone who saw my work with at-risk youth as meaningful rather than just a job that didn't pay enough to afford the lifestyle she was accustomed to. Monica would curl up next to me on my beat-up couch and listen to stories about kids like Marcus, who'd gone from weekly discipline problems to becoming a certified junior lifeguard, or Elena, who'd used the confidence she'd gained from mastering ocean rescue techniques to stand up to her abusive foster parents and demand a placement change that might actually stick. "You're changing lives every single day," Monica would say, tracing patterns on my chest while we watched the sunset from my tiny deck. "These kids will remember you forever, long after they forget every teacher who gave up on them." She'd seemed genuinely moved by the thank you letters I'd get from program graduates, carefully reading each one and asking about their progress months later, remembering details about their struggles and victories that I thought only I cared about. When Marcus got accepted to community college with a partial scholarship for academic improvement, Monica had insisted we celebrate with dinner at her favorite restaurant, an expensive steakhouse where she'd proudly introduced me to her colleagues as her boyfriend who worked with underprivileged youth and was making a real difference in the world. But apparently, that was all performance. carefully calculated to make her seem deeper and more socially conscious than she actually was, like wearing my compassion as an accessory that made her look more interesting to her wealthy friends. The woman who'd held my hand during the memorial service marking 15 years since my parents' car accident, who'd promised me that my past didn't define my worth and that she loved me for exactly who I was, had been privately viewing our entire relationship as a temporary arrangement until someone more suitable came along. Standing on the beach where I'd taught dozens of kids that they were capable of saving lives and deserving of love, I realized Monica had been doing exactly what every foster family had done, keeping me around until something better became available, making me believe I belonged while secretly counting down the days until she could upgrade to a more appealing option that better matched her real ambitions. For 5 days, I became a ghost in my own life, avoiding every place Monica might think to look and immersing myself so completely in work that my captain started asking if everything was okay at home. I took on extra training sessions with new recruits, volunteered for weekend emergency response shifts, and spent my nights camping on the beach with nothing but a sleeping bag and the sound of waves to drown out the 27 missed calls and 43 text messages that kept lighting up my phone. Monica's messages started confused and demanding, progressing through anger, bargaining, and finally panic as she realized I wasn't just sulking but had genuinely disappeared from her orbit. "Where are you? Kyle said you left his party early and haven't been home," evolved into, "This is ridiculous, Jared. Whatever happened, we can talk about it like adults," then finally to, "I'm scared. Please just tell me you're okay. I don't understand what I did wrong." I only responded once, a brief text that said, "I heard what you really think of me at the party and I need time to figure out what that means for us." Her reply came within minutes. "What are you talking about? I don't remember saying anything about you." Either she was lying or she was so comfortable dismissing me that the conversation hadn't even registered as significant. Monica appeared at my fire station during shift change, cornering my captain to ask if I was avoiding her, then showed up at my cottage so many times that my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez started texting me updates about the white Mercedes parked outside like she was running surveillance. She even tracked down Kyle at his nursery business, demanding to know where I was staying and what exactly I thought I'd heard, but Kyle had my back the way he always did, telling her only that I needed space to process whatever was bothering me. "He's being dramatic," Monica told Kyle, according to his later report to me. "We had a perfectly normal evening and now he's acting like I committed some unforgivable sin." The most desperate move came when she showed up at my youth surf program, arriving during a Saturday morning lesson when I was in the water with 8 kids from various group homes, trying to force a conversation in front of children who'd already seen too many adults lose their composure. "Jared, we need to talk right now," she called from the beach, her designer sandals completely inappropriate for the sand, her voice carrying the kind of authority she used with vendors who weren't meeting her standards. I guided the kids back to shore and asked my volunteer assistant to take over while I dealt with what was clearly an emergency, though not the kind Monica was pretending it was. "Not here," I said quietly, walking her far enough from the kids that they couldn't hear us. "These children don't need to see adults fighting." "Then stop ignoring me and come home so we can figure this out like reasonable people," she hissed, her perfectly applied makeup starting to smudge in the ocean breeze. "I heard you, Monica. At Kyle's party. You told your friends I was temporary entertainment until you found someone better." Her face went through several expressions: confusion, realization, then calculation as she figured out how to minimize the damage. "You're taking that completely out of context. We were just talking girl talk, you know how that goes. You said I wasn't marriage material. That you couldn't introduce someone like me at your industry events. I was venting about feeling pressure from my parents, that's all. You know how they are about status and connections." Even now, caught red-handed, she was trying to reframe her cruel dismissal as somehow being about other people's expectations rather than her own judgment. I watched her scramble for explanations while 8 kids waited in the surf for me to return, kids who understood better than most adults what it felt like to be unwanted, and I realized I was done with this conversation and everything it represented. 2 days later, I was sitting on my cottage deck grading incident reports when an unfamiliar car pulled into my driveway, a modest Honda Civic that looked completely out of place compared to the luxury vehicles Monica usually surrounded herself with. I watched Haley step out, Monica's younger sister whom I'd met exactly 3 times at family gatherings, and I immediately tensed because family intervention was the last thing I needed right now. But instead of the confrontational energy I expected, Haley approached my deck with her hands visible and her expression genuinely apologetic, like someone coming to confess rather than lecture. "I know you probably don't want to see anyone from Monica's family right now," she said, stopping at the bottom of my deck stairs without invitation. "But I need to tell you something about what happened at that party, something Monica doesn't know I witnessed." Haley was 24, a marine biology graduate student at UC San Diego working on her master's thesis about coral reef restoration, and she'd always struck me as the quieter, more thoughtful Williams sister during our brief interactions at holiday dinners and family barbecues. Where Monica commanded attention with her polished confidence and designer outfits, Haley preferred practical clothes and seemed more comfortable listening than performing, asking genuine questions about my work with at-risk youth while Monica networked with her parents' influential friends. "I was in Kyle's kitchen getting ice when I heard Monica talking to her sorority sisters," Haley continued, her voice steady but clearly rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this confession. "What she said about you being temporary entertainment, about not being marriage material, it was horrible and cruel and completely unfair." She climbed the steps slowly, giving me time to object, then sat in the chair across from mine when I didn't tell her to leave. "But there's more you need to know, things she's been saying privately that make this whole situation even worse." I set down my pen and focused entirely on Haley, noting how different she looked from her older sister despite sharing the same basic features. Where Monica spent hundreds monthly on salon treatments and designer makeup, Haley's hair was sun-bleached from hours spent diving at research sites, her skin slightly weathered from outdoor work, her clothes practical rather than fashionable. "Monica's been lying to you about more than just her feelings," Haley said, her green eyes meeting mine directly. "She's been planning to get pregnant and force a proposal, telling our parents and her friends that she's ready to lock down your relationship before you realize you could do better." The words hit me like a rogue wave, unexpected and disorienting. "What are you talking about?" "She stopped taking birth control 3 months ago without telling you, started tracking her ovulation cycle, even bought pregnancy tests in bulk because she was so confident her plan would work." Haley pulled out her phone, scrolling to screenshot evidence. "She's been bragging about how easy it would be to manipulate you into marriage once she got pregnant, how guilty you'd feel about abandoning her and a baby given your foster care background." I stared at the text conversation Haley showed me, messages between Monica and their mutual friend Jessica discussing strategies for accidental pregnancy, timeline calculations, and Monica's excitement about transforming me into husband material once I was trapped by parental responsibility. "She thinks you're too nice and too damaged to leave a pregnant girlfriend," Haley continued, her voice getting quieter as she delivered the most painful revelations. "She told Jessica that your abandonment issues make you the perfect target because you'd never risk doing to a child what was done to you." The manipulation was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty, using my deepest trauma as a weapon against me, but what struck me most was watching Haley struggle to deliver this information, clearly distressed by her sister's behavior rather than defending it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because it's wrong, and because I've had feelings for you since we met at last year's family barbecue, and I couldn't watch her destroy a good man with lies and manipulation." The admission hung between us, honest and vulnerable in a way that reminded me how differently the Williams sisters approached the world. "I know that's complicated and probably the last thing you want to hear right now, but watching Monica treat you like some kind of project to be managed instead of a person to be loved has been making me sick for months." Haley's confession shifted everything I thought I understood about the family dynamics I'd been navigating, revealing that someone had been seeing Monica's true nature and feeling horrified by it rather than impressed. "I've wanted to warn you, but I didn't know how without seeming like I was trying to sabotage my own sister's relationship for selfish reasons." Before I could respond, we heard the familiar sound of Monica's Mercedes pulling into my driveway with unnecessary aggression, gravel scattering as she parked behind Haley's Honda. Monica emerged from her car like a woman ready for war, her expression shifting from anger to shock when she spotted Haley sitting comfortably on my deck. "What the hell is going on here?" Monica demanded, her voice carrying across the small space between us. "Haley, what are you doing?" "I'm telling Jared the truth about your pregnancy scheme and your real feelings about him," Haley replied with calm certainty, standing to face her sister. "Someone needs to treat him with basic human decency." Monica's face went through several colors as she processed what Haley had revealed, then settled on a dangerous shade of red that meant someone was about to get the full force of her fury. "You manipulative little bitch," Monica snarled, climbing my deck steps without permission. "You've been waiting for any excuse to move in on my boyfriend, haven't you? Your temporary entertainment, you mean?" Haley shot back, using Monica's own words against her. "The man you described as not marriage material to anyone who would listen?" The confrontation escalated quickly, two sisters who'd apparently been harboring resentments and competing for unclear stakes finally having the fight they'd been avoiding for months. But then Monica played what she clearly thought was her winning card, the manipulation she'd been preparing to use before Haley's intervention ruined her timeline. "Well, congratulations, you can have my sloppy seconds," Monica announced with theatrical satisfaction. "Because I'm pregnant with Jared's baby, and we're going to be a family whether he likes it or not." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of waves crashing below us and Monica's satisfied smirk as she waited for her pregnancy announcement to devastate both Haley and me into submission. I looked at Monica standing on my deck like she just announced winning the lottery, her pregnancy claim hanging in the air between us like a weapon she expected would end all discussion and force me back into line. But instead of the devastation she was clearly anticipating, I felt nothing but cold clarity as all the pieces of her manipulation finally clicked into place. "When did you find out?" I asked calmly, pulling out my phone to check the calendar. "Because according to my calculations, we haven't been intimate in over 3 weeks, not since you started acting distant and picking fights about my work schedule." Monica's confident expression faltered slightly, but she doubled down with the kind of desperate improvisation I'd seen her use when event vendors delivered the wrong flowers. "I've been feeling sick for days, and I took 3 pregnancy tests this morning and they were all positive." "Show me the tests," I said, standing up from my chair. "And then we're going to your doctor for confirmation because if you're really pregnant, we need to discuss what that means for everyone involved." Haley was watching this exchange with obvious skepticism, and I could see her doing the same timeline math I was, realizing that Monica's pregnancy announcement was suspiciously timed to coincide with her exposure rather than any actual biological reality. "I don't have to prove anything to you," Monica snapped, her voice taking on the shrill quality it always carried when she felt cornered. "A woman knows her own body." "You're right," I agreed. "But a man has the right to medical confirmation before making life-altering decisions based on someone's claims, especially when that someone has been lying about birth control for months." Over the next hour, I watched Monica's pregnancy story crumble under the weight of basic questions and timeline inconsistencies, her elaborate scheme unraveling as she struggled to maintain lies she hadn't fully thought through. Kyle arrived during the middle of this confrontation, called by my text asking for backup, and he brought his laptop bag containing the research we'd been conducting since Haley's initial revelations about Monica's deception. "Show him what we found," I told Kyle, who opened his laptop and displayed the screenshots of Monica's social media activity that painted a completely different picture of our relationship than the reality I'd been living. Monica had been curating our Instagram presence to make my career and modest beach lifestyle appear more glamorous and financially successful than they actually were, editing captions to imply I was a fire captain rather than an instructor, photographing my cottage from angles that made it look larger and more upscale, even posting images of expensive restaurants with vague captions suggesting we dined there regularly when we'd actually only gone once for her birthday. "You've been telling your colleagues I'm a fire captain?" I asked, scrolling through posts where she'd tagged me with false titles and accomplishments. "You've been pretending I make more money than I actually do?" "I was trying to make you look good," Monica protested, but her voice lacked conviction as the evidence mounted against her. "People judge based on appearances, and I wanted them to see how successful you really are." But the most damning evidence was Kyle's discovery of Monica's Pinterest boards and saved Instagram posts, collections of luxury engagement rings and wedding venues that cost more than my annual salary, coupled with search histories on her laptop showing extensive research into how to get pregnant quickly and signs your boyfriend is ready to propose. You've been planning this manipulation for months, Haley said, reading over the evidence with obvious disgust. You never intended to build a life with Jared, you intended to trap him into funding the lifestyle you think you deserve. Kyle had also uncovered evidence that Monica had been telling her coworkers and friends that she was pushing me to apply for higher-paying corporate safety consulting positions that would require me to abandon my youth programs, presenting this as career advancement rather than admitting she was embarrassed by my actual work. You want me to quit working with at-risk kids because it doesn't pay enough to support your designer handbag addiction, I said, the full scope of her manipulation finally becoming clear. You've been systematically undermining everything that actually matters to me while pretending to support my values. Monica's attempts at damage control became increasingly desperate as each lie was exposed, her explanations growing more elaborate and contradictory until she finally abandoned all pretense and revealed the calculating mindset that had driven her behavior from the beginning. Fine, you want the truth? She screamed, her perfectly composed facade finally cracking completely. I've been dating beneath my standards for 2 years, waiting for you to grow up and become the kind of man I can actually build a future with, and I'm tired of pretending your little rescue missions are more important than providing for the woman you claim to love. The words hung in the air like a confession, revealing exactly how she'd viewed our entire relationship and validating every fear I'd carried about not being good enough for someone like her. Except now I realized the problem had never been my adequacy but her inability to recognize value beyond dollar signs and social status. 3 days later, we sat in Dr. Patricia Valdez's office while Monica underwent the pregnancy test she'd been avoiding since her initial announcement, her confident demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety as medical reality threatened to expose her final desperate lie. I'd insisted on accompanying her to ensure she actually went through with the appointment rather than fabricating results, and Haley had come along as moral support for what we all suspected would be another revelation of Monica's dishonesty. The blood test is negative, Dr. Valdez announced with professional neutrality, looking between Monica and me with the kind of careful expression medical professionals use when delivering news that might trigger emotional reactions. You're definitely not pregnant, Monica. The symptoms you described could be stress-related or due to hormonal changes from recently stopping birth control. Monica's face went through several stages of processing this information, from shock to disappointment to what looked like genuine confusion, as if she'd convinced herself so thoroughly of her pregnancy that she'd actually believed her own fiction. But I took 3 home tests and they were positive, she protested weakly, her voice lacking the conviction she'd displayed on my deck. Home pregnancy tests can show false positives for various reasons, Dr. Valdez explained patiently. Certain medications, medical conditions, or even improper test administration can cause misleading results. The blood test is definitive. I felt a complex mixture of relief and exhaustion as Monica's last manipulation crumbled, but what struck me most was watching her struggle to process that her carefully planned scheme had been built on nothing more than wishful thinking and desperation. We left the medical office in complete silence, Monica walking to her Mercedes like someone attending her own funeral while Haley and I followed at a respectful distance, both of us recognizing that this moment marked the definitive end of whatever relationship Monica and I had pretended to share. But Monica's humiliation was far from over, because that evening brought an unexpected visit from her parents, Richard and Patricia Williams, who'd driven down from their Malibu estate after Monica had apparently called them with news of her pregnancy and impending engagement. I answered my door to find 2 people who'd always treated me with barely concealed disdain standing on my porch holding a bottle of expensive champagne and wearing expressions of forced congratulation. Jared, congratulations on the wonderful news, Richard announced with the kind of enthusiasm wealthy people use when they're pretending to be happy about developments they actually find distressing. Monica told us about the pregnancy and that you're planning to propose, and while this isn't exactly how Patricia and I envisioned our daughter's engagement, we want to support you both during this transition. I invited them inside while texting Haley to come over immediately, knowing this conversation would require witnesses and moral support as Monica's web of lies reached its inevitable conclusion. There's something you need to know about Monica's pregnancy announcement. I began carefully, watching their faces as I explained the medical appointment and negative test results. Patricia Williams went through several emotional phases as she processed this information, from confusion to anger to what looked like genuine shame as she realized her daughter had fabricated an entire crisis to manipulate multiple people simultaneously. "She's not pregnant?" Patricia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She called us crying about being scared and overwhelmed, needing family support during this difficult time. "She's been lying about more than just pregnancy," I continued, and over the next hour I walked them through the evidence Kyle and Haley had compiled. The manipulative social media posts, the birth control deception, the calculated attempts to trap me into marriage, and most devastatingly, the recorded conversation where Monica had dismissed me as temporary entertainment to her sorority friends. Richard Williams, a prominent entertainment industry executive who'd built his career on reading people and recognizing manipulation, listened to everything with growing horror before turning to his older daughter with an expression I'd never seen him wear around family. "Monica, is this true?" he asked quietly. "Did you really say those things about Jared? Did you really plan to trap him with a fake pregnancy?" Monica's attempt to defend herself dissolved into tears and eventually angry accusations against everyone present, but her parents weren't interested in hearing excuses for behavior they clearly recognized as socially and morally unacceptable. "We raised you better than this," Patricia said, her voice carrying decades of disappointment. "This is manipulative, cruel behavior that reflects poorly on our entire family." The confrontation reached its climax when Richard, clearly embarrassed by his daughter's actions and probably concerned about his professional reputation being connected to this scandal, pulled out his checkbook and attempted to buy my silence about the entire situation. "Jared, I think we can all agree this has been a misunderstanding that got out of hand," he said, writing numbers on a check with practiced efficiency. "Perhaps $50,000 would help you move forward and ensure this unfortunate situation doesn't become public knowledge that might damage Monica's career prospects." I stared at the check he held out to me, recognizing it as the ultimate expression of how this family viewed relationships and problems. Everything could be solved with enough money, everyone had a price, and emotional damage was just another business expense to be managed. "Keep your money, Mr. Williams," I said, standing up and walking to the door. "Your daughter's behavior speaks for itself, and I'm not interested in covering up her lies or protecting her from the consequences of treating people like disposable objects." The Williams family left my cottage that night in complete disarray, Monica sobbing about how nobody understood the pressure she'd been under, Patricia demanding to know where they'd gone wrong as parents, and Richard muttering about damage control and reputation management like this was a corporate crisis rather than a family tragedy. But before they reached their cars, Haley made her own announcement that shifted the family dynamics in ways none of us had anticipated, declaring her intention to stay in San Diego and pursue her relationship with me regardless of her family's approval or disapproval. 8 months later, I stood barefoot in the sand at sunset, watching Haley walk toward me in a simple white dress that moved perfectly with the ocean breeze, her smile radiant as she approached the altar we'd built from driftwood at the exact spot where I taught my weekend surf lessons. The ceremony was everything Monica's elaborate wedding fantasies had never been: genuine, meaningful, and surrounded by people who actually cared about our happiness rather than the size of our budget or the exclusivity of our venue. Kyle stood beside me as best man, grinning like he'd personally orchestrated this entire love story, while Haley's maid of honor was Elena, one of my former students who'd become a marine biology major at UC San Diego after our youth programs helped her discover her passion for ocean conservation. The guest list was a beautiful mixture of former foster kids who'd become family, firefighters and emergency responders who'd supported me through the Monica crisis, marine biologists and environmental activists from Haley's research community, and the handful of teachers and mentors who'd shaped both our lives in meaningful ways. Dr. Valdez, who'd become an unexpected friend during the aftermath of Monica's pregnancy deception, performed the ceremony with warmth and humor that reflected how much our relationship had grown from crisis to genuine partnership. Jared and Haley have asked me to speak about the difference between loving someone for who they might become versus loving them for exactly who they are right now, Dr. Valdez began, her words carrying extra weight given how she'd witnessed the contrast between my relationships with both sisters. Haley had spent the past year helping me establish the Pacific Coast Youth Foundation, a nonprofit organization that combined ocean safety training with marine conservation education for underserved communities, postponing her prestigious fellowship opportunity because she believed our work together was more important than advancing her individual career. "When someone loves you authentically," I said during my vows, looking into Haley's eyes while waves crashed behind us, "they don't try to change your priorities or diminish your passions. They find ways to support and enhance what already makes you who you are." We'd received an unexpected letter from Monica 3 weeks before the wedding, sent from New York City where she'd relocated to work for a high-profile celebrity event planning firm, and while I'd initially considered throwing it away without reading, Haley had convinced me that closure required acknowledging Monica's attempt at communication. The letter was surprisingly honest, acknowledging her manipulative behavior and expressing what seemed like genuine remorse for the pain she'd caused, though she stopped short of taking full responsibility for the calculated nature of her deception. "I realize now that I was trying to force you into becoming someone you never wanted to be, instead of appreciating the person you actually were," she'd written. "Haley deserves the credit for seeing your value when I was too focused on my own agenda to recognize what I was throwing away." The letter concluded with her blessing for our marriage and a confession that losing me had forced her to confront how shallow and transactional her approach to relationships had become, leading to therapy and what she claimed was genuine personal growth. Whether that growth was authentic remained to be seen, but her acknowledgement felt like the final piece of closure I needed to move forward completely. As Haley and I exchanged rings made from sea glass we'd collected together during morning walks on the beach, I thought about how different this moment felt from anything I'd imagined with Monica. There was no performance, no anxiety about meeting someone else's expectations, just pure joy at committing to someone who loved me exactly as I was. By the power vested in me by the state of California and the unwavering belief that true love recognizes and celebrates authentic partnership, Dr. Valdez announced with obvious happiness, "I pronounce you husband and wife." The reception was held on the beach as the sun set over the Pacific, with string lights powered by solar batteries and a potluck dinner contributed by everyone who'd helped make our relationship possible, creating exactly the kind of community celebration that reflected our values rather than our budget. Later that evening, as Haley and I walked hand in hand along the shoreline where our story had really begun, I realized I'd finally learned the difference between being loved as a temporary convenience and being cherished as a lifelong partner who shared someone's deepest dreams about making the world a better place.